My Stream Deck's not working, that's the problem. There it goes. New profile image to contain. Did I spell your name right, Mike? Sweet. I did it without looking, so I was kind of confused. Is the music coming out? I have it muted because I don't want the reverb. Okay. Yeah, I made that mistake last time. I played it and then my microphone picked it up and then it just started echoing really bad. Why did I lose the... I lost the background. What happened? Stupid cat. Oh, there we go. Okay. That's weird. All of it. Yeah, so so we're gonna have like we'll have a little conversation, kind of little interview type thing, and then Mike will do his presentation, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with more questions and whatnot. about it. All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. My name is James Petty, and welcome to episode 8, PS Power Hour. I am joined today by the most awesome John up in this corner, and our guest host for today, one of the co-founders and organizers of the Raleigh PowerShell user group, Mr. Phil Bossman, and of course, our guest for the day, Mr. Mike. I can never pronounce your last name. We're just gonna go with Mike. Hi, guys.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Doing good. So it's Tuesday. It's 5 o'clock here in Tennessee. I think Mike and Phil are out. We're also on the East Coast, but John, it's 2 o'clock over at your time.
Yes, it is 2 o'clock.
Yep,
it's been an afternoon.
Awesome. I know. Tomorrow we'll get the deli update, but I hope you hope you enjoyed your vacation, and I hope you got some good deli food while you're out hiking.
It was, and it is. So good stuff. Awesome.
So Phil, I know I kind of threw you in at the last minute. I apologize for that. I was supposed to ask you 2 weeks ago, and I forgot. So thanks for joining us. We're starting a new thing, kind of bringing on guest hosts. That way, it's just not me, John, and Dylan Thomas every time. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Phil Bossman, and 40 minutes is perfect enough time for notice. You know, that's all it works. That's all you really need. So I run the Research Triangle PowerShell user group, and Mike is a great guy, and I think he's really brought a lot to the group, and I'm super excited to hear what he has to say today, or actually just be a part of that, and we're a good team, the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. We're a really good team, and we're really fortunate to have Mike on that team, and it should be good.
This is going to cost me. Too many nice words. It's going to cost me.
I'm going to build you up so we can tear you down.
All right, so Mike, why don't you introduce yourself for all of our 17 people watching, and all the thousands of people that are going to watch us on YouTube.
Hey, everybody. My name is Mike Kanakis. I am an AD infrastructure engineer for a company called Align Systems. They make Invisalign braces. I'm also pretty active in the community. You guys probably know or seen me on Twitter. I'm associated with PowerShell.org. I help them with some of the community events. I blog, and I have I blog for various websites as well as my own, and just your general sysadmin trying to get by every day.
Awesome. Now, so before we hop into Mike's presentation, I do want to remind everyone about the 24-hour live stream that we're doing in conjunction with PSConf Asia and also the PS UK Day. So the CFP is open. It closes September 15th. So we're approaching that. Today's the 1st of September, ironically enough, or the 184th day of March, kind of however you want to look at it. But so go ahead and get your CFPs in. We do need a lot more, especially in the earlier UTC time zone. So if you're on the other side of the world from where we're at, we'd love to have you.
Or certainly, I would say, support that as well as if, certainly put in a time. But also if you're like, hey, I got no problem waking up at 2 a.m. and actually being a part of this, and I'd really like to participate, the opportunity is there for you. And so
that is also
just because you don't live at the right hour, and you can put it in there. So if you're available to, or you feel like you want to, or you're available to do it, feel free to do it. So because the content you have to share is valuable to everybody, and we really want to encourage that for you. So
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, well, Mike, why don't you go ahead?
Can I add one more thing?
Also, go ahead, Phil.
The PowerShell conference book version 3 is out, and it is currently being in works. It is like 70% done. The last couple chapters are getting proofread with the editor, but that is actually published right now. You can buy your copy today, and it is technically a conference book. I'm actually a participating editor, and there's a ton of great content in there. And if just the world of conference is the value of a conference is to walk into a room and just absorb some information and just walk to another room and get a whole nother view. That's exactly what this book is. And so this is version 3 of that book, and actually that's version 2. But on top of that is that the idea of really diving deep into a different topic, and not so much to grasp enough that you can get the content, but also enough to wet your whistle and want some more. So I really think it's a great book. So definitely.
Awesome. Yeah. So
there's a link in the chat.
Dill posted the link in the chat. For those of you that are going to watch this later, this is in the social events channel, both in Discord and Slack. It's also leanpub.com/psconfbook3. But yeah, so with that, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about and take it away.
So we're going to be talking about, let's start that again. We're going to be talking today about how to create a module, and we'll do it by hand. So this is foundational knowledge. If most people think you need to know how arrays work, the pipeline, all these things, this is another piece of that foundational knowledge, how to build modules so you can share code with others. And before we jump into that, that PowerShell conference book that Phil was just talking about, for those who might be listening that might not be aware, all the proceeds from that book, 100% of the proceeds, not just the profits, go to fund charitable learning programs at PowerShell.org, at the DevOps Collective. There's a sister program that rides alongside the PowerShell Summit called the On-Ramp program. And in the past couple of years, we've been able to send about 10 people a year, all expenses paid, so that they can spend a week learning from PowerShell experts in the field, getting not just technical advice, but advice on career as well. So that's what the book is about. There's lots of great content, but know that every dollar that you spend towards that book goes towards helping people get started in the community. So with that being said, I don't ever do presentations without some slides. So let's get some slides going. I know everybody loves slides. So here we go. All right, so you guys should be able to see my screen now, right?
Good to go.
All right, so let me just minimize that so I'm not looking at myself. All right, so today we're going to be talking about making your first tools module. Tools meaning, most people when they get started, they're not making some modules that's super specific, like this is my certificate management module. It's more like, hey, I made a bunch of cool scripts, and either I've been asked to share them or I would like to share them with others. So maybe you've turned those scripts into functions, maybe you've built them into reusable tools, and now you want to package them together and you want to get them out there. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So real simple, we're just going to go through some quick slides on module basics. It's like 8 slides. It's going to be quick. Then we're going to jump right into making some modules. So I'm going to try to demo 3 different modules. And then if time allows, after we make those modules, we can talk about how we share those modules. Simple stuff, should be easy and interesting. I mentioned earlier that I'm an infrastructure tools engineer, and I'm pretty active on the community. If you'd like to track me down, please find me on Twitter. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. This talk borrows heavily from the Microsoft Docs and also from Kevin Marquette's PowerShell Explained website. Both of those are excellent resources. If there's something that I didn't cover today that didn't make 100% sense, specifically, Kevin's website is where I did a lot of the research on some of the particulars for myself. So chances are, if there's something that I didn't cover today that you're interested in, if you head to Kevin's site, you'll probably see some of the similar content. All right, so with that, let's go back to school. So there's a picture of a calculator on here because I'm using it as a reference to remind you of when you may have went to school way back in the day and you had to do the math yourself. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And then one day you show up at school for the new school year and they say, you know what, this year you guys are allowed to use calculators. And you start using a calculator and you say, OMG, why the hell did I have to do all that math prior to this? This is so much easier. However, you still need to know how to do the math. And it's expected that you're using a calculator now because you're going to be moving on to bigger and better problems, more complex things. And things like doing simple math and simple division and simple subtraction isn't really the focus anymore. We want to get you past that and move you onto more complex things. And that's a great analogy for why we should be learning about how to build modules. The reason I say that is there's tools out there that can build modules for you and automate away much of the work. However, it's assumed that there's some foundational knowledge when you come to use those modules, those module builders. It's assumed that you know how a module works and what the moving pieces are, and the tool is really taking away the work of you having to do it by hand. So if you're not familiar with that, I don't recommend that you start with some of the automated tools to build modules. you do it in the way that we're going to talk about today. So with that being said, let's dive right into some of the basics. What is a module? It's really simple. It's just a simple way to share code. It's a portable package that contains things like functions and aliases, commandlets, helper scripts, and it's a simple way for you to package things together and be able to give that code to other people. So as I kind of just alluded to, why would you make a module? It's all about portability. If you think about it, most of the code that you've consumed from a vendor or from Microsoft has come through the way of a module. And a module really serves two purposes, really the same purpose, but from two different viewpoints. If you're looking to share code with someone else, you kind of want to give people your code, but you may not want to have to sit there and have to help people figure out how to install that code. And if you're looking to consume code, like for example, I work in the Active Directory module quite a bit. I want to consume that code from Microsoft. I don't necessarily want to have to open a support ticket to figure out how to get that module installed. I want to follow a simple procedure and import that module into my machine and just be able to use it. So a module does that for us. It creates a package that we could share. And if we do it the right way, we can publish that module in a number of different locations. People can then consume that code. And with just a little bit of effort, they should be able to use the scripts and the functions and the other things that you're sharing without any real challenge. So very quickly, there's some major pieces of a module to consider. And first and foremost is the code itself. Talking about the PS1 files. So when you save a file, you're saving as a PS1 file. That's the code. That's the part you want to share. You can also include things like supporting files, like helper scripts, but you don't have to. And then another major piece would be something called a manifest. And a manifest is really data about data. It's metadata. And I would like to explain that to people as like it's the index of a book. The book is what you read. The index tells you how to get to the parts that you're interested in. And last but not least, we package that all together into a directory. And if I'm going through this fast, it's because I really want to get to the code and less about the basics, because this is something that anybody could pick up, but it's good foundational knowledge to cover so that when we're talking about the pieces in a few minutes, it doesn't seem so foreign to everybody. So going through those major pieces again, we talked about the code. There's something called a PSM1 file, and that's where you're going to park your code. And I'll show that off in a second. And then I mentioned there's a manifest. The manifest is the metadata about the module. So that's data that describes the module. And that's saved in a PSD1 file. And I like to think of the D as data about the module. And then there's this concept of public and private data, meaning that if I had, let's say, 20 scripts that I wanted to share, or let me rephrase that and say I had 20 scripts that I wanted to put into my module, but for some reason, 15 of those scripts are not meant for people to see. They may do back-end work. I could publish 5 of them, and I can hide 15 of them. Now, this is not a security context. People can still find those hidden scripts. It's just what I'm showing to the end user when they import my module. And then last but not least, it's always about documentation. And what I mean by documentation is I'm less concerned about the documentation about the module itself. I'm more concerned about documentation that talks about the code in the module. So remember, if you're sharing code with others and you're going to give code to people for them to consume, you want them to be able to figure out how to use the code by themselves. So that means you need to have supporting documentation for your scripts to explain how they work, what the parameters there are, different examples of how they work, so that they can be self-sufficient and use the module without having to rely on you. That documentation can also be turned into online documentation that you can send to a website or to a GitHub repo that can be either the same as what's in the module, or it can be even more detail about your module. So if we go through those pieces one at a time, we talked about a PSM1 file. That's where I said the code lives. And a PSM1 file, as I said, it's where the code lives. And any valid PowerShell script can be a PSM1 file. So if you have a file like get my AD user.ps1 and you simply rename that to a PSM1 file, congratulations, you just created your first module. It's really that simple. Now from there, of course, you can expand and do a lot more, but the PSM1 is the tool that we use to share the code with other people. So once you save it as a PSM1 file, it can then be imported into another machine to be consumed by another user. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. A PSM1 file needs to be saved in a folder of the same name. So if you're making a module called My Awesome Module, you're going to have a folder called My Awesome Module, and you're going to have a PSM1 file called My Awesome Module.psm1. We'll go into that a little bit here, but these are just some of the basics that you need to understand of how they work. And last but not least, there is this idea of a module path. So there are certain folders on your machine that control where modules are stored, and PowerShell is pre-programmed to look at those areas, and if it sees any files there, it will suck them in and make them available for you. So if you're building a module, we need to place it into one of those paths so that it's available. We can also import a module so that it's available for like one-time use, and then when we close this session, it's gone. But if we want to keep it in sort of a permanent state, there's some predetermined paths where things need to live, and we'll look at that in a second. So that PSD file, which I talked about, which is the manifest, it's the data about data. It's the info about the module. So if I was to share a PSM1 file with someone, that would get them the raw code. But I haven't shared with them any information about what version of the module it is, or who built it, or even what I want to call my module. All that information sort of lives in the manifest. It's not a requirement, but it's pretty much a standard file that would be included in any module that's built to be shared on a large-scale basis. And as I said, this file really describes the contents and the attributes that are contained in the module. It's, as I said, module name, version, author. If we're going to share it on the PowerShell gallery, we need to have a unique GUID so that it can tell these modules apart, and on and on and on. Also, you can use the PSD to require prerequisites. So if I'm building a bunch of scripts that require Active Directory, I may want to put a requirement in there that says, in order for this module to run, you need to have the Active Directory module loaded, so that people don't load the script and they get a bunch of red text when they try to run your commands, and then they think you've wrote some really garbage code and they start wondering what happened. So you can say, hey, I have some requirements that are needed for this module to run, and if you don't meet those requirements, then the module is not going to be able to run and be able to produce the code that you want. And at the same time, we'll also make them aware of what those requirements are. As I said, PSD file is not required, but if we're talking in practical terms, if you're going to build a module, you're going to have a PSD. It's an important piece of a module. All right, so that's it. We're done with slides. So let's take a look at some demos here. All right, so let me give you guys a little bit of a lay of the land of what we're going to talk about today. I have possibly 5 demos that I could run through. I'm not sure that we're going to get to all 5. We can definitely do the first 3, which is about building modules. And I've named these modules very simple, straightforward names. No one would ever name their modules these names, but this is for demonstration purposes. So what we've got here is we have 3 modules that we're going to work with. One's called Demo Module Simple. Another one is going to show how you use a manifest. And then we're going to move it up to when you would consider using like public and private data. Now, I have some other stuff here for the other demos. We'll see if we can get to it. I would like to talk about how you can share code internally and online. We'll see what we're allowed to get to today. So now I also have this folder here called Functions. This has nothing to do with the module. This is for me to organize my data for the presentation, and then into the actual presentation files I'm going to show today. For lack of a better description, the only things that you need to be concerned with are these 3 folders here. Each one of these folders represents a different module. Now, inside of these modules are going to be these 3 functions. Now, for all 3 modules, we have the same 3 functions, because we're not here to talk about what the functions do. We're really here to talk about how do we get started building a module and how do the pieces work together. So we're going to use the same.
Real quick,
yes.
Do you increase the resolution or the zoom level on your Visual Studio Code? Makes it a little easier on folks reading in chat.
You guys got to tell me how big they go.
Looks like the bitrate is slow too.
Enhanced.
Better?
That looks great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
that'll probably.
all right. So I'll try to make this as readable as possible as we go. But so you're going to see these 3 folders we're going to be working in this afternoon. And these 3 folders are really going to be doing the same 3 functions, which I'll go into in a second. And I chose these 3 functions for a particular reason, which we'll get into. All right. So I have some notes for myself here at the top. Let's clean this up a little bit. And let's talk about what we got here. All right. So I'm going to just get some things set here. All right, so the first thing I'd like to show off is I mentioned, oh, that looks a little gross. Let's clean that up and do that again. All right, so we mentioned earlier a PS module path, and that may not make a lot of sense to people. So a PS module path is a variable on your machine that contains a bunch of file paths that are relative to where code related to PowerShell may live. And some of these have specific uses. Some are geared towards a user. So these are things, this is a place where I could put things for myself. These are more geared towards the whole, like sharing a module to anybody who uses the machine. And then we have some directories like this one here, which you might say, why would I want to see a version 1 modules folder? That's really a relic of when PowerShell first was introduced. This is where Microsoft publishes all their modules. So if we were to browse this folder, you would see all the modules that most people work with. There's lots of stuff in there. So this is actually not a legacy thing. It's just an old naming convention. So we're going to be focusing on getting our modules into one of these folders and how they work. And then we're not even really going to be touching on that. We're going to be importing mostly today. But if you want to have your module available for people to use, this is where they're going to have to go, in one of these locations. And they all vary a little bit. Like there's this PowerShell 7. That's because I have PowerShell 7 loaded on my machine. There's Windows PowerShell, which is geared towards PowerShell 5, which is Windows PowerShell. PowerShell 7 is technically PowerShell Core. And then you have some other folders. So I wanted to explain that to you. And the easiest way to see that is just by pulling up this variable, and then you can split on the semicolon to make it a little easier to read. All right. So these are the functions we're going to be talking about today. I think by name, they probably make a lot of sense on their own. Get drive info, get PC info, and get PC uptime. So let me just clean this up and make sure that I don't have anything running. All right, good. All right, so first thing we're going to do here is load this. All right, so bear with me 1 second here. Presentation piano. Okay, so these are the functions. Okay, I showed you already. We're not going to use these. We're going to use them, but this path doesn't mean anything. Here they are, and I'll show you how they work in a second. Now, the first thing I want to start with is all my modules here, they start with the word demo. Okay, so you can take a look and you can see which modules are already installed on your machine by typing get module. What we're going to end up with, though, is a list of everything that's installed on the machine. What I'm interested in here is I would like to see if I have any of my demo modules installed already, and I don't, which is what I would expect if I'm doing my presentation to show you how we're going to install these. So this is just to show you that we're starting with a clean environment. All right. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what a module looks like. So if you remember in the first example, one of the first slides, I said that you could rename a file, a PS1 to a PSM1. And that's effectively what I've done here. So if you remember, I showed you that we had 3 functions. Now, I didn't show you what's in the functions, but I think we all know what most functions look like. I've simply taken those 3 functions, copied the code into one file called demo module simple PSM, because I'm calling my module demo module simple to highlight the idea that this is the simplest version of a module that you can make. So by simply copying in these 3 functions to one file, renaming it with a PSM1 file, I've created my first module. It's that simple. So now all I need to do is to import that module, and then I can use it. So I wanted to show here, get command, let's see something here, get PC, get PC, okay, get drive, okay, get PC uptime. Okay, so I just tested. None of my functions are loaded. So here we're going to do a simple import statement. And what we're going to do here is I've just created some variables to help me get around the machine easier. That's just saving to some of these paths right here. So what we're using a command called import module to actually take the module and import it into my machine to this, and we simply have a path to the file. So if I run this here, I've now imported the module. Now if I go back here and I say get module, right? I want to switch to my, oops, I want to switch to, I didn't want to do that. Sorry, guys. I want to switch to a different directory for a second. And I want to show you that we now have a module installed. So there we go. We didn't have to do really any work at all, and now we have a module. And I'm going to shut off this bar for a second here. And if you see here, we have some basic info about a module. So it picked up the name of the module from the folder and the PSM1 itself, but it doesn't know anything about version info. It knows that it's a collection of scripts, it's a script module, and this got cut off here, but you can see here that it knows that there's 3 commandlets in the module. So not too bad. We didn't really have to do any work. We simply copied 3 files into a PSM1, ran an import module statement, and there you go. You've made your first module, and if we were sharing this with someone else, they would simply have to type import module and browse to the file, and you have now shared your code with someone else. Probably a lot easier than doing sneakernet or emailing files to each other, but this is really the basics. We don't really know too much about the module. If you're trying to get some credit for the work that you do and it gets circulated at work, nobody knows that you've made these files or anything like that, so we can definitely do better. But at the very basics, we've created a module and we've shared a module, which a lot of people think is a challenging task on its own. And actually, you see here, it's quite easy. So now that I have the module loaded, I can run my commands. So if I run get PC info, it's thinking, comes back. I'm in my lab environment here. So it says the machine I'm on is PC01, lab information, and we have some drive information here. I have a separate drive info module that pulls up the drive info that's contained here. There's also a way to export it. And then last but not least, we have some PC uptime. And there's a reason that I selected these modules. So I'm going to start these commands that I got into now. So what you may not realize by looking at this code is that this get PC info commandlet calls this get drive info commandlet behind the scenes. I've built the module out, the function out separately so that you can run get drive info if you wanted to. But if you notice here, when we did get PC info, you'll see that there's a drive info here. And I could have pulled that info out to a variable. Give that a second to come back. And then I could say here foo, and I'll say format table. Drive info. All right, so, and we're going to talk about this more in a little bit. So this get drive info can run on its own, but it's also a sub file for this get PC info. So when get PC info is run, it reaches out to get drive info behind the scenes and goes and gets some information. That's going to come to be a little bit more important later on when we talk about public and private folders. So I'll just check in with the guys. Any questions so far?
No, you're doing good.
Yeah, all good here.
All right, thank you, sir.
Looks great.
All right, so let's get our environment set up here again. So that's really all it is to our simple module, okay? So now I'm going to move over here, and we're going to take it up a little bit. We're going to introduce the concept of a manifest. So this is all just noise for me. We really start here. And what I want to do is I first want to show you what a manifest looks like. So as you may have remembered when I started, I talked about the PSM1 file and the PSD1 file. And we said that the PSD1 is the data about the module. So if we click on that and we look at that file, we can see here there's a file that's created here with 150 lines of info. We're not going to go through it all. I just want to highlight a few sections. So this is the info about the module. And you can see it has a path to it, has a module number, it has a GUID, it has an author, I didn't put a company name, and it's got some copyright info. And there's other information here that I could use if I wanted to, like required modules, things like that. They're all commented out. Now, at first blush, you might say to yourself, wow, I really was not interested in typing up 150 lines of information about my module. And I'm not expecting you to do that as well. What I'm showing you here is a PSD file that's been pre-produced. So in order to create a PSD1 file, there is a command called new module manifest. And what that will do is that will suck in some information that you provided, and it will create this file so that you don't have to do the work. So if we back up here just a little bit, I have this created already. So in order for this to work, I need to get rid of that file because we already have one. Right? We want to make one fresh. So let's rename that file. So you see here we have an old. So now we're missing a PSD1 for this module here. All right. And if we come down here, I've built a little hash table of some basic info that I want to pass to my commandlet that's going to build the manifest. Hash table is just simply a combination of keys and values. So I'm setting here, there's a key, or there's a field called path, and this is the value I want to populate in there. So in essence, I'm saying, hey, I want to pass these 4 keys of information to the manifest commandlet that's going to build the commandlet. And as you can see down here, I can now show you what this, let's load this. So here we are, and then I can just pull that up. Hey now, I should have had him just there.
You missed the last line of the hash table.
Thank you, sir. Let's try that again. It's good to have friends. Okay. Okay, so here we have a manifest. And like I said, name and value. So we have 4 values, 4 fields or value keys, and 4 matching values that are going to go with that. So now that that's loaded into memory, we've done this. We're going to pass that hash table to this command. So when we do that, the key to thing here is you should see a new file show up over here. So if we do this, what did I do wrong? I have a path wrong here.
You're in the wrong path.
Yeah. So let me get, why did I take that off? All right, so
you need CD to it.
Thank you.
Oh, not taken.
All right, let's try that again. So now we're going to run this and call that hash table. Okay, so you see over here, we now have a file that was just created. So let's take a look at that file. It's going to look very similar to the one we just created, to the one I just showed off. And let's make some room here. But you can see here it's generated today. It's got my name, right? So it's the information I passed to it. And I put a random version number in here, a quick blurb about version numbers. This is really, you could put anything that you like. Some people believe that you would put version 1 when you think that your code is good to be shared with production. Some people start at 000. I just use 0.6 to illustrate a difference here. It created a GUID for me. I never specified that. It did that for me. It plugged in my name as the author. I didn't pass any company info, but here it made me look official with some legal info, and the rest of the stuff is commented out because the rest of the stuff that's here is not a requirement. Even though these lines are not commented, these are saying export all the commands. We'll talk about that in a second. The rest of the stuff for what we're doing at this point is not really valid. So now that we have a manifest.
So one of the questions there, Mike, is that the reason you'd want to do this is just to add these other context information to it. So the reason, is that correct? Why you'd want to, the difference between this module and the next one, the first one and this one is just, it's the same code, but just now I want to add some extra detail to the module so that I can share it better. Is that correct?
So that is correct. So what we're doing here is we've gone from the first module, which was just simple code, and then we've added in information about the module so that we have a little more detail. And at first glance, when you're looking at this, you say, well, maybe I don't really need a manifest file. But we're going to move on to the next example soon, and we're going to start to talk about public and private data and other things that we can do. And when we get to that point, a manifest is going to become a requirement because we won't be able to do those things without the manifest. So if your intention is to take 50 scripts and make a quickie module and share it with someone and let them have access to all 50 scripts, and you don't care about having an author name or a module version number or anything like that, then obviously just creating a simple PSM1 file is fine. But if you need to start to do some of the more advanced things that come with a module, a manifest is going to become a required piece of information, and I'm going to show that here shortly.
What are those advanced things that we can do?
So we're going to talk about when we get to public and private, how we can have code in different folders and how we show different functions to people and we hide different functions. That's really what I'm going to focus on today. But you could also add in helper scripts. You can add in aliases. We talked about those require statements in the beginning. If I want my module to not run unless there's some required modules loaded on the machine or any, all that stuff is going to come down via the manifest. So remember, that PSM1 file, think of that as raw code. If you have any sort of special situations that you need to design for, you can't do that in a PSM. You need the PSD to handle all those situations for you. Hiding modules, making requirements, version information, help stuff. All that stuff comes into the manifest. But I didn't start there because I wanted people to see that it isn't a required piece of information for simple code sharing. Do you think that I covered that in enough detail?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So let's come back to this public-private in a second, and let's look at this manifest for a second. So I'll get my bearings. Okay, so now we're going to do exactly what we did in the last example, is we're going to import that module, okay? And with any luck, we'll import this. So now, if you remember from earlier examples, if we want to see what modules we have installed, we use the get module command. And in this case, I want to limit my view to the modules that start with demo. So now we have 2 modules installed. And it's the same functions in both modules. We're not here to talk about the functions today. We're here to talk about the other stuff. So you see in our first example, we don't have any version information, and we have just demo module simple. Now in this second iteration, we have the name, but we also have picked up the version. But if I then look at this module again and I say format list, and I pull this up a little bit, you could see we're starting to get a little bit more information here about the module, okay? But we still really haven't done a whole bunch. I would say, now I want to caution people here, if you have no experience with modules, I'm going to start talking about using the manifest in a little bit more advanced way. This is an awesome place for you to stop. I don't want you to stop watching the demo, but if you've never done this, practice with the 2 modules that I've made. Get good at that, because once you start getting into public and private, hiding, require statements, and all that good stuff, it gets more complex and you can get yourself confused. So I would caution that if you've never done this before, you maybe just don't want to jump into some of the detailed stuff. If you're up for a challenge and you think you can handle it, obviously go for it. But build yourself up so you have some confidence. All right, so if we move on here, we don't need that open anymore. We can look at this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this public-private scenario. So what we're looking to do here is, remember, we have 3 functions. And what I'm looking to achieve in this demo is to say, hey, you know what, this get drive info, that's the command that I said was being called by get PC info. I want to make that invisible to the end user. Okay, so first let's take a look. That's the goal that we're trying to go for here. So first let's take a look at what we have here. So now if we go and we look at this module, and I'm going to minimize some stuff here to make it easier to see. If we look at this module, we now have some subfolders. We have a public and a private area. We still have a PSD1 and a PSM1, but now we have a public and a private. And as I just started to mention, the PSM1 now is different because we have to deal with folder paths. So if we look at the PSM1, this is extraneous text that's not supposed to be here. So you see now I have to load my paths and I have to pull those file names in, right? So that's what I'm doing here. I'm basically telling the module through the PSD, in the PSM1, where these files are located in the folder structure. All right. And so again, this is information that wouldn't normally be there. So my PSM now, instead of having a bunch of functions in there, I now have placed my functions inside these folders and I'm referencing them here. Right. So we're starting to get a little different in the way that we're building this.
So are you saying also that in looking at that, you can see that the public and the private are just reference names. So you can call it foo and bar, you can call it, don't look at, you can call these folders anything you want. And in the PSM1, those files are referenced directly. And so you just reference them in whatever way you want to.
And that is exactly right. So if we were to take this farther, if you were to look at some modules by someone like Jeff Hicks, who creates tons of modules, he may have a different folder structure than public and private, but he may also have 5 or 10 or 15 extra folders that are important to his module. The structure isn't so much as important as long as the module pieces know how to navigate through that module and find the pieces that they need. So I've gone and used public and private because it makes it very simple to understand the concept. Private is going to be code that I think people aren't going to see, and public is code that I expect people will see. And as I said, this is not a security feature. This is really an organizational feature. As Phil said, we could call it foo and bar or anything we want. What I'm doing here is organizing my data in a way that makes sense when I build the module so that I understand what I'm doing. Again, for most people, they're going to get files passed along to them, and they're just going to suck them in, and it's going to work the way I intended. They may never look at this. However, because these are just files, someone can open up this folder and these files and look at it. So I would not advocate by making a public and a private or anything like that, that you are actually hiding information from people. You're just sort of organizing data in a meaningful way. All right, so let's take a look at this for a second here. Public, private. Okay, so here we have our PSM, and I had made a PSD already. I'm not going to do it again. But if we see PSD now the PSD gets a little bit more interesting. So we're seeing the same stuff that we saw before. This is an old one I created. I'm reusing. But if you come down here, I have this section called functions to export. And this is related to what I'm calling public. They're not the same. What I'm saying here is in this manifest, these 2 files are the files I want to expose to the end user. And then I think I have, so that's it. So even though I'm putting files into folders, I'm stating through the manifest which files people are going to get to see. So I could have put these all in one folder and just said, hey, I only want to export these two, and I would have had the same net result. But you also have to remember something. If you're looking at doing something like this, and you build a module, and you go back to doing your daily work, and you come back to that module in a month, 2 months, or 6 months, maybe you want to do some updating. If you don't build yourself some structure to understand how things work, you're going to have to go back and pick through all the files to understand how you built that structure. And what you'll see in some of the automation tools that build modules is they build out a structure for you to populate, and then you just place your data in there. So again, you don't necessarily have to have this structure per se, but without it, it makes it very hard to figure out later on when you come back. You have to really go through and start over and figure out everything in order to say, what was I doing here? So for myself, I've built in a public and a private just for organization's sake. This functions to export. What's going to happen is when we read in the module, when we do our import statement, and that reads the PSD, that's going to tell the computer, remember when we had, when we went up here and we looked at our module statements, and we saw that there was 3 functions exported? Well, that's what this is here. Well, now we're going to say only export 2. So on the next iteration of the module that we import, it should only show 2 commandlets. So let's do that. I need some space here because it's a little hard to see with all this big stuff here. All right, so let's browse down here. I'm not going to run this, but I want to show you that I made a new manifest file and I incremented it up, which we'll see in a second here. I could have run the manifest. I could have created a new manifest and done all the same things. Nothing is different here, same exact process. And now I'm simply going to import my function here. And now if I'm going to just make this a little easier to see, if I go up to get module, and again, we're looking at demo. Now you can see I have 3 modules in here. And now you can see the function, the export function in actuality. So the module that we imported here actually has 3 functions in there. But to the user who doesn't know any different, they only see 2. And we know that it's still there. So what I'm going to do is I'll uninstall these modules in a second, because I would like to run these and show you that it still works. But because I've loaded the module 3 times in the same commandlets, if I go and I call the command, I can't really be guaranteed which version of the command is going to run. So we're going to clean it up in a second to show that. But the idea here is that when we run get PC info, we're still calling get drive info behind the scenes. It's just that the user who's using the module doesn't realize there's a second function doing some extra work behind the scenes. So now that we have imported this here, what I want to do is I want to remove some modules. All right, so here I just removed one module. All right, now I'm going to go and remove the other one. I'm going to say with manifest. Okay, so now we just have our 1 module installed. And again, the reason for doing this is just to highlight how these functions work. So now let's test our commandlets. Let's make sure that they still work. Right? Let's start with get PC uptime. We haven't saw that one, I don't think. Right? So this is just a simple function I built. Right? That works. Right? Now if I go and I want to run get PC info, and what we should see here is we still have that drive info. But if you remember from earlier, we talked about the piece that did that as another commandlet. So now let me try and run that commandlet, get drive info. Now, yeah, I know you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm hitting tab. That function should have auto-completed if it was installed, which means since it's not completing, it's not installed. However, we know that we got the information back, so we know behind the scenes that get PC info called this module. I'll call this commandlet. So does that make sense, what we did there?
Yep.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So do we have questions from the community about anything that I've done?
No, nothing in the chat.
Okay. Well, we wanted to stick to about 45, 50 minutes. This is a good breaking point. We could talk about this a little farther, but I have some more information I could pass along. All depends on time we have left.
Well, I think one of the things that we could just discuss is that some of the reasons why you'd want to do some of that stuff, and I think is that why would you want to create some private functions just strictly to keep things private, or not so much private, or just to have some extra work in the background? And what other things would you want to organize within your functions?
Well, so we can leave that open for discussion because I think all of us probably have our own reasons as to why we would do that. I think for the most part, people hide functions either because they're gathering some information that they don't necessarily want someone to be able to see easily, but is required for some other part of the module, or very simply, I'm making a module for a group of individuals that just need to do one or two things. And they don't understand that those one or two things are dependent on 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 other things. They just want 1 or 2 commandments. So it's a simplicity thing more than anything. There are other reasons why you could hide commandlets, but the reason I think of mostly is to take away functions that don't really have any value to the end user. So another example I'll give of that is because I hid that get drive info function, I could have called it anything I wanted. And then there is this idea that when people start hiding code, let's say, or make it private or not exported, that they use different function names to know that if they got an error, that came from a private function versus a public function. Now, those are not requirements. Those are really best practices. Everybody sort of has their own method of how they work. But the idea is that if you run some code and it produces an error, and the error happens with one of your private functions, if you put an oddball name in the error message, that is a tip when you get the feedback from the user that they received an error, that it wasn't the exported function that had a problem, it's the function behind the scenes that may be not working as expected.
Well, does it kind of make sense to actually, only expose or export the functions or the commandlets, as you decide for that the users are supposed to actually be running? And so it could be doing other work, but hey, I need to do some logging stuff, I need to do all that kind of stuff, and you want to create functions for them so that it's better to manage. But then also, it might be a good idea to you don't need to expose that to the user. Not that you're trying to hide it. It's just like, why do you want to clutter somebody's tab complete with all this stuff that will then inject into other people's work? So I think one of the things is that with private is to try and if the function needs to do some work, well, that can be private. But if you want the user to actually interact with the module, then that's where stuff you put in public, so that they're the ones interfacing with this. There's no reason why somebody needs to the logging parts of your function, if that's
right.
part of it.
Right. Another way that you could explain, and Phil is 100% right there, and there's no right or wrong here. It comes down to use case. What do we usually do for executive summaries for senior leaders in our organizations? They get the 1-paragraph version of the technical document, right? Use that as an example here to say, hey, I want to give someone the summary view of what's happening. If I have to build a spreadsheet, and behind the spreadsheet, I produced 9 tables of information, and then at the end, I combine those 9 tables of information into the final result, maybe that person doesn't need to see that 9 tables of temp data. They just want to see the final result. That's just an example of a way that you may want to think about it, to conceptualize why you might want to obscure some of the data from someone, because maybe it's just not pertinent to what they need to do. Yeah. What I didn't show in here is how to do the require statements or anything like that. There's a lot of time you could spend just in the PSD alone, making lots of different examples of things that you could do to customize your environment. My goal here today was to take someone who had no experience creating a module and giving them the confidence that with some simple examples, they could find a way to easily share some code. So we could obviously go deeper into doing more things, but the goal today was really just to make it seem tangible enough that someone might want to go back and say, you know what, I think I could actually do this. So I kept it to very simple examples. I think any module that you find online that you're going to download or consume from a vendor is going to be much more advanced than what I've shown you today. But this is the stuff you need to understand if you ever want to go into the world of making your own modules and sharing your code. So I hope that people enjoyed what I had to show. We can talk about any individual pieces, and I would like to show how you can share that code online or internal repositories, but I don't think we have the time to cover that today. There's a lot more involved with that, and this is probably a good breaking point to give people enough information to absorb and take it home with them and work on.
I'd like to point out, Mike, that all of the demo files are available on your GitHub, which I've been following along through your presentation. And so if a person wanted to get started with a scaffold and basically follow your video start to finish and see each iteration, it's all put it up there. So thanks for that. I think we'll probably provide a link via YouTube or via the community through Twitch, Slack, Discord, and all the communication channels. So I really liked it because, again, if you have a place to start, you can make a comparison with a more complex module, and you can know, if you got a place to start from, you know where you can get going as far as module development is concerned. So it's really great.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, didn't you guys about a year or so ago at the Research Triangle PowerShell user group, you and Phil and Kevin, and I think there was one other, I think there's a presentation on YouTube that has how to publish to the gallery as well.
So the funny part about that statement is we actually did that for your group as well, James.
I don't think mine was recorded, though.
No. So I would say that my knowledge has come along a great amount since I did that presentation. But the idea of our group and that presentation is Phil, myself, and Kevin Locks, one of the other leaders of the group, we sometimes do presentations where the presentation isn't necessarily complete, polished, like this is reading a manual on how to do something. That particular presentation was Phil, myself, and Kevin saying, we need to share code with our coworkers. Here's 3 different ways that we achieved that goal. Let's just show you how we did it. And we were cognizant enough to say during the presentation that these are not the only ways to do it. And you may have better ideas, but we were trying to share with the community some examples of how you could share code. I think Kevin was using box.com, shared folders. Phil was doing, if I remember correctly, a file share internally, but not a NuGet repository. And I was doing a NuGet repository where you could publish a repository. So get PS repository. We didn't talk about this, but this is a list of the repositories that your machine knows about. And the only one that comes pre-installed is the PowerShell gallery, but it's untrusted. So I have some other information which I could share at a future date where you can then publish your own PowerShell NuGet repository internally. And then you could take these files and put it in the repository. And then nobody needs to do any of these import statements. If they set up their machine with the setting and make it a trusted gallery, which you could push through a group policy or a reg key or a startup script, then when they open up their PowerShell command prompt and you have your module in one of these trusted locations, they just have the code and there's nothing for them to do. So that's really the part 2 here. But I will tell you from doing this myself, it's very easy to get yourself tangled up very quickly. So that's why I really want to push the idea, stick with the simple stuff and get with it really well. And I'll give one other example of that. Last year, I changed positions. I went and worked for Align Technology. And before I left, I worked for my old company. I had produced some code for the company. And a couple of my friends had said, hey, man, I really would love to get that code from you. Man, I really would like to get that before you leave. And I was like, yeah, no problem. So I produced a PSM1 just like this. I'm trying to make a habit of putting in help files into all my work. So I didn't have to go and create a bunch of help files in the last 2 weeks to try to teach them how to use this stuff. Each function had its own help file. So I gave them the PSM1 and I told them just, do an import statement. And they're like, okay, can you show me how all these functions work? And I was like, no. Every function has its own help file. It is a self-sufficient file. You can import it and you can run the help for any one of the functions. And you actually don't need me anymore. If you have questions about my functions, I'd be happy to help you try to figure them out. But there was enough information in there so that I could leave the company gracefully, share the work that I did with my coworkers, and give them enough information so that they could work after I was gone and still be able to be productive.
All right, Mike. Well, we appreciate it. It is at the top of the hour, so we are out of time for the day. So, John and Phil, thank you guys so much for co-hosting with us. Mike, thanks for a fantastic presentation. Like we said, this will be posted on YouTube in about a week or so, and we'll try to put your GitHub. Remember to put your GitHub file on there. So we'll see. So we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks, September 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and then for the rest of the time zones, we'll try to put that every time zone link out so that you know exactly what time to join in. And also make sure to get your papers in for the 24-hour live stream. Other than that, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Have a great day.
Yeah. Take care, everybody.